This is it's something I put together quickly this morning about kind of exploring what we can do with existing and slightly future technology, but if we apply it in a different way. So the talk's going to be kind of around using technology to do permaculture. So first of all, this seems to be where we're headed. It's not really where we probably should go, but this kind of like nightmare pizza delivery, no contact scenario. This seems to be like I don't know why, but we seem to misuse technology in this kind of crazy thing. And there's so many projects where they're just like trying to get drone delivery to make sushi faster or something, and it's like, okay, is that really what we should be working on? So what I'm trying to do here is connect together open source technology, robotics, kind of apply it mostly to food production, like farming, but it's kind of it's relevant to fuel production as well, and then try and weave that into decentralized finance systems. So kind of bring those three things together and something like this. So carrots. Have you ever noticed that carrots are like way cheaper than say cashew nuts? Like cashew nuts are delicious, more I would say more delicious than carrots, and you can make cheese out of cashew nuts. So really, if there was this like future world, I would ask that if cashew nuts were as cheap as carrots, that would be really good. The question is, why are carrots really cheap and cashew nuts not cheap? And you might think, oh well, carrots grow faster, but it's not. Maybe they do a little bit more. The reason why they're cheap is because of this thing. So this is how they get carrots from the ground. They just pull this big wedge-shaped bit of metal, and it's kind of beautiful. It just like it slurps them out of the ground, and the cashew nut approach is you have to pull these things off the tree. The top bit is fruit, but the bottom part is like super toxic, and it has this like husk on it. So you have to kind of steam them, and then these people have to like take the husks off, and it's awful. No one really wants to do it. So when you're buying cashew nuts, the reason they're so expensive is because it's awful. It's like dealing with cashew nuts is bad. So the reason we can't use the magic wedge-shaped thing on cashew nuts is because it's much more complicated. And really, like the level of farming that we've gotten to is we just drag these metal things behind a tractor, and it means what we have to do is we have to change the environment so it's just one giant monoculture, so you can drag the metal thing over it. So you make the farming situation as easy as possible, like with the carrots, and then you can do big farming. But that sucks because monocultures means that disease can just wipe out crops really quickly. It's like it tends to favor centralized farming. So if you're a bigger farm, you make more money because you just have to have one of the big metal things that you drag along, and you just have a bigger one, so you only need one employee. So the way it's set up tends to mean that we start terraforming the whole countryside into these big monocultures. Now, what would be better is if we have a food forest. Now, this was mentioned earlier. So native people all over the world have been farming in variations of this kind of way for ages. Like, because if you're just farming yourself, you start to figure out that there's space under the big tree that has shade, and there's stuff that likes growing there. And so you can very densely farm, and you have one type of plant that locks the nitrogen in the soil for another type of plant, and there's kind of like seasonal variations. So there's a method of farming which yields a lot more output than doing the big monoculture thing. But the problem with it is it's very like fiddly. It's like you have to do a lot of little complicated things. And so you can't just drag a big slab of metal across it. It just wouldn't work. You have to there's finesse. All of our robots basically at the moment don't have finesse. They're these like, this is like probably an automotive manufacturer kind of situation, but this is sort of kind of current level, widely used robotics. And they're kind of a thing, and you just teach it one set of moves and then it does that whenever you ask it to. But it doesn't really adapt. Like the car gets brought to it and then it welds the car and then the car carries on. So they're not good for farming. But there's this new type of robot, which is just beginning to emerge. Now, this kind of thing it's in the environment and it's adapting to the environment. So this one's trying to open this door, but this guy is like stopping it from opening the door. Now, this is kind of made for military purposes, more or less, but the important difference with this terrifying thing is that it's using like the messy kind of all over the place environment of the real world, and it's kind of doing what it wants to do. So you could absolutely teach this thing to pick fruit. Like that's not what they're thinking with this, but you could teach this thing to do careful gardening, which is interesting. But you might ask, like, well, isn't something like that really expensive and hard to make? And yes, that one is. But this is called OpenDog, I believe. And this is like the open source version of the other one. So anyone can just make one of these using a 3D printer. And then this starts to do the same kind of thing. So this is kind of like emergent technology. We're not quite there yet, but in the next 10, 20 years, this is the kind of thing that gives me hope. Because if we can automate the like production or the sort of tending to of wide scale farms that are actually these food forests, it means that, and if we do things like urban aquaculture. So this is kind of also terraforming the environment to make it easier for growing food. But this is using kind of vertical space, like on the outside of buildings or something like that, where you can do a whole bunch of growing. So this is all technology. In Europe, a lot of food is grown this way anyway, but they just do it somewhere else. They don't do it like in the city. Now, imagine a situation where you have food grown all over the place on like city streets, like on corners. You start getting into this kind of interesting situation where it's like, it's not really clear who owns it, or like who's getting paid to look after it, or it's very all over the place. And maybe on a large scale society like say in Auckland, being able to do that and keep track of like who should be looking after which plants and who's actually eating the food, that's where we can start using this new sort of finance, like microtransactions. Like at the moment we barely have PayWave, but there's this new stuff coming, which means that you could have like a subscription to the food thing, and then you can like cook some food and it goes in, and then that means you can get some food out. Or there's a whole bunch of experimentation we could do with that, which I think would be really interesting. This is an example of a system using that with solar panels. So they're kind of micro selling, not to the grid, but to their neighborhood. And then other people in the neighborhood can choose exactly where the power is coming from, not just like, oh, I want to have this power provider. So what I'm seeing for the future is there's loads of space. Like there's loads of space here that you could grow. So instead of these kind of underused empty streets, we can have these like high-rise urban gardens, and have it so you can just walk along and be like, oh, I'm kind of hungry, and you can grab some food over it, and then whoever was helping make that food gets a little bit of an income, so the local people can earn a living even just by growing food. And instead of these massive monocultures where we've just set it up for the robots to be dragged through, we instead can have people and maybe also this new generation of robotics tending to these food forests, which is, it kind of, for me, it means that we blur the lines between farmland and parkland. Because this, if you just change this a little bit and maybe put a bike lane through it, it's kind of a park. Whereas a big farmer's field, it's like no one wants you to go in a farmer's field. It's definitely like you're impacting their crop yield or something. So it's sort of useless land. You can't use it for anything except farming. Whereas this is more dense. You can do more dense farming. Okay, that was where I was going with that. So, are there any questions, or would anyone like me to expand on any of this? Oh, I mentioned before that you can use this for fuel as well. Where I was going with that is you can it's easy to grow biofuel. So growing sunflower seeds, for example, or rapeseed oil or something would totally mean that you can have fuel. And it's kind of the same thing. Even probably some of the crops would be like among the food crops. Yeah, another important point is with information sharing, it's becoming much easier to to take this, what used to be like knowledge that had to be passed down from generation to generation, or I got a question from Joanne. How do all these future technologies exist without using massive amounts of fossil fuels? That's a good question. It's a lot of what we do uses a lot of energy, and that's kind of this is super trippy, this thing. Like, the fact that we use a lot of energy isn't necessarily bad. It's just like, how are we making that energy? Like, we've got all this amazing medical science now, which is only possible with these giant magnets and stuff, and like CT scanners, and it just uses loads of energy. But like, if you're generating the energy in a clean way, it's fine. That's no big deal. Like, growing stuff also uses energy. It's just plants do it, like from solar. So I'd say we can have these things and just have them battery powered and solar powered, and just have renewable energy. That's fine. Yeah. Talking a little bit more about what aquaponics is and how that would fit into an apartment or vertical living situation. Good question. So aquaponics is, actually, I think I'm talking about hydroponics, whichever one it is. It's growing food without using earth. So you use liquid instead of earth, which a lot of things grow much faster if you just have water with some nitrogen in it, the stuff that the plants want. It means also that you can kind of control pests much easier, because if you have earth, you have a tendency to get pests. So you can, if you're doing this in your own apartment, you can kind of combine it with a fish tank. So normally you have a fish tank and you'd have to have a filter, but you can use some lettuce as your fish tank's filter. You have to add some kind of fertilizer. It's actually really little. Like, from my experience of doing it, it's way less than I thought you would have to add. So what I think would be cool is taking the waste stream of like a city, or say in Auckland, if you took all of the compost recycling, all of the organic waste, and use that to make like either to break it down into something the fish can digest, or you can use it to make soldier fly larvae, or there's loads of larvae that can eat it really well, and then the fish can eat those, and then you use the waste from the fish to make the nitrogen cycle. So yeah, exactly that, using fish to give nitrogen and plants. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it means you can do it like up a vertical wall where there's absolutely nowhere where you can grow. And I know in some places in Auckland there's like earth requirements, so you can't just put a whole bunch of earth somewhere. So to get around that, you can use this kind of thing. It's how they'll make food in space. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks very much.